What's up guys, Rogue9 here. In my last Rainbow Six video exploring the new guns for Operation Chimera, I made a somewhat troubling discovery. The in-game fire rate stats of Finka's Spear 308 and especially that of Lion's V308 did not match the actual fire rates I uncovered in my testing. With the Spear, the difference was moderate. I measured around 730 RPM instead of 780, and I was prepared to accept that maybe my measurement methods were not accurate enough. But for the Vector, my tests suggested a fire rate of around 720 to 730 RPM, while the in-game stat tells us that it's supposed to be 850 RPM. And of course, the obvious question that came up was, if the in-game fire rate stats are not accurate for the new guns, then what about the old ones? For months now, large parts of my online gun stats spreadsheet have been based on the in-game fire rate stats. The damage per second DPS stats, and following on from there the time to kill or TTK stats all hinge on the fire rate, and the worst case scenario could be that I got all of that info wrong. So as promised, I've gone back and manually measured the fire rate of each automatic weapon in the game, and I have good news everyone. In fact, I have two pieces of good news everyone. First of all of the in-game stats for existing automatic weapons in Rainbow Six Siege are accurate. Phew, so my beloved DPS stats are not all a complete mess after all. And the second bit of good news is that my measurement technique, which I doubted quite significantly in my last video, turned out to actually be pretty damn accurate, and I'm somewhat proud of that. For existing guns, the average difference between the in-game stats and my measurements were only 2 RPM for each gun. For instance, for the FMG9, I measured a fire rate of 803 RPM when the real number is 800. Okay, massive drama has been avoided, so what I want to do in this video is quickly go over my tests and how the results confirm the in-game stats, and then go back and take another look at the V308 and Spear 308. Now that we can calculate their fire rates accurately and we know that the other stats can be trusted, we can properly compare the effectiveness of the two new guns against the competition, and I have to say that this new knowledge was eye-opening. I may need to revise my opinion of Finka's Spear. It's actually pretty bad, but more on that later. As always, a pinned comment below will allow you to jump straight to this part of the video if you're not so much interested in my quick maths. So first, let me show you how I measured the fire rate and how accurate those measurements turned out to be. Many thanks to everyone who left ideas on how to measure the fire rate on the last video. There were some great ideas in there. It is worth noting here that I measured the fire rate for each gun by firing them in full auto mode. Why is this important? Well, there are some guns in the game where you can actually shoot the gun faster than its normal full auto fire rate simply by clicking your fire button really fast. Here's a quick clip of Shark Tomato demonstrating this feature, or should I maybe call it a bug? Phenomenon. Let's go with phenomenon. Demonstrating this phenomenon on Frost's 9mm C1. Emptying the mag on full auto takes 3.544 seconds, and this gives us a calculated fire rate of 575.62. On the other hand, emptying the mag while clicking like a maniac results in a much higher fire rate of 709.57 in this case, and this could potentially end up even higher with a good clicking run. Long story short, this phenomenon is not something I'm taking into account. I'm only looking at the normal full auto fire rate. And now over to my methodology and results. Here's what I ended up doing. You will remember from the last video that I measured the rate of fire by firing a full mag, measuring the time it took from first to last shot, and then dividing that time by the number of bullets fired. That gives us a time per shot, and if we divide 60 by that time per shot, we get the final result as a number of rounds per minute. There is one small issue with this method though, and that is that the rate of fire then varies depending on the number of shots fired. Why, you may ask? Well, the reason is that the first shot occurs as soon as you pull the trigger. It's instant, and that will slightly skew the average time per shot. Let's look at a simple example. If we fire 2 shots from the 6P41, which has a nominal fire rate of 680 RPM, the first shot occurs instantly, and the second one is fired around 88 88.235 milliseconds later. This means that we are able to fire 2 shots in 88.235 milliseconds, and using the calculations I set out a minute ago, we end up with an actual measured fire rate of 1360 RPM. This is clearly not a very good representation of the gun's fire rate over a longer period of time. The more shots we fire in our timed burst, the less the first instant bullet will affect the overall average. For example, I timed 8.73 seconds to shoot all 100 bullets of this machine gun, and running through the calculations now brings us to an actual fire rate of 687 RPM, which is already much closer to the 680 RPM reported in the in-game menu. So the conclusion is that shooting longer bursts gives us more accurate results, but up until now, I could never be sure about what I should do with that first instant shot, since I only ever measured the fire rate for pistols and DMRs where I had no in-game reference, or for the new guns where the in-game stats were inaccurate. Now that I've finally gone back to double check the other weapons, I have some reliable reference values to adjust my calculation, and the good news is that the change was really simple. The in-game rate of fire data simply takes out the first shot completely and calculates the rate based on the interval between each remaining shot, and so all I had to do to my method is subtract 1 bullet from the number of shots fired in each burst. If we do that for the example of the 6P41, we have 99 bullets fired in around 8.73 seconds, which gives us a per shot interval of 88.182 milliseconds. Divide 60 by this interval, and the end result is 680.41 RPM, and you know what? I'll take that. Once this simple adjustment is made, our calculated fire rates become incredibly accurate. My worst result was for Mira's Vector, where the 3 trials resulted in fire rates of 1180, 1196 and 1180 RPM instead of the nominal 1200 used in-game. That's a deviation of only -1.65 and -0.32%, resulting in an average deviation of -1.21%. And that's the worst result I had. Overall, my calculated values were only off by an average of 0.44%. Okay, I'm done with my maths bragging now. The important part in all of this is that we can now go back and recalculate the rates of fire for the V308 and Spear 308 with the tweaked method, and what we end up with are fire rates of between 703 and 708 RPM for both guns, and thanks to Epi for his kind confirmation, we now know that the rates of fire for each of these new guns is 700 RPM. With this newfound knowledge, we can now go ahead and examine each weapon's performance, and we can compare it to the other attacker rifles. The baseline damage stats of 44 and 40 mean that we end up with DPS values of 513 for the V308 and 467 for the Spear. This is of course at close range before any drop-off against level 1 armor. At long range, those values are reduced to 292 for both guns. The all-important question here now is, how do these stats compare to the rest of the attacker weapons? Looking at the assault rifles first, at close range the average DPS in this class is 540, and that means that both of the new guns are below average, and in fact the Spear's measly 467 DPS will put it almost at the very bottom of the class, with only Blackbeard's Mark 17 managing an even worse stat of 410. In case you were wondering, the third worst rifle here is Ash's G36 with 494 DPS. At range, the rifle class will do an average of 313 DPS, which again places both of the new guns below average, but only just, with Blackbeard, Zofia and Thermite all ending up with lower damaging weapons even than the Spear. So neither of the new guns are great at dealing damage, but especially the Spear seems significantly underpowered at close-range engagements up to 25 meters. It is worth noting though that because of the slightly earlier damage drop-off of Lion's heavy vector, there is a distance bracket between 27 and 32 meters where the V308 is in fact the worst performer in terms of damage output, and it's only from 33 meters and onwards where the Mark 17 reclaims its rightful place at the absolute bottom of the pile. Poor old Nerfbeard, for some reason I feel a strong connection to him, and I feel a bit bad that he has to deal with such an appalling rifle. He never deserved this. Okay, fair enough. He deserved a nerf or two, but not this. Back to Finka and Lion, and of course both of them have access to other weapons as well. You can choose to bring a shotgun if you're into that kind of thing, or as Lion you can bring a 417 DMR, or as Finka, a 6P41 machine gun. Are these guns maybe better choices? Well, the 417 can put out 518 DPS up to 25 meters, which is basically the same as the V308's 513, so no real reason there to make the switch unless you anticipate firing at 20 meters and above, because here the 417 will start to provide an advantage, with its damage output not bottoming out until 40 meters and only going down to a minimum of 338. Keep in mind though that the average distance for kills in Rainbow Six tends to be below 10 meters, so you might struggle to take full advantage of the 417's longer reach. The bottom line here is that Lion's Vector 308 is a pretty good choice for him, even with the revised damage output. For Finka though, the damage output of the 6P41 is vastly superior at most combat ranges, starting at 533 DPS and not dropping below the Spear until a distance of 40 meters or more, where the 6P41 becomes surprisingly weak and only deals 285 DPS. So in terms of raw damage output, the Spear is sadly one of the worst attacker rifles you could choose, but there is one last thing I want to discuss before wrapping this video up. The thing we need to keep in mind is that in order to down an opponent, you only need to deal 100 points of damage, and that means that against level 1 and 2 armor opponents, almost all of the fully automatic attacker weapons will need 3 shots to down or kill. So all of the nuanced damage stats we see for the rifles, with max damage ranging from 38 for Ash's G36 all the way up to 48 for Capitão's Para 308, is more or less meaningless. The only thing that counts is how quickly your gun can put those 3 necessary hits onto your target, and that's down to the fire rate and to a degree also the controllability. And that means that against level 1 and 2 armor, the V308 and Spear have the exact same time to down or kill of 171 milliseconds, which is only just slower than the 161 millisecond average for rifles. It's only against level 3 armor that the Spear will need 4 shots even up close, and because of the lackluster fire rate, it will end up with the slowest time to down or kill for all fully automatic rifles, 257 milliseconds. As always, if you want to look over these stats for yourself, you can find everything I've discussed today in my online spreadsheet, link in the description. In conclusion, in terms of raw damage output, the V308 is just below average, but still a good choice for Lion. Finka's Spear 308 has a laughably bad damage output, but can actually still perform just as well as the Heavy Vector against level 1 and 2 armor due to having the exact same fire rate and still needing just 3 shots to down or kill. It's only against level 3 armor or when Rook plates come into play that the Spear starts to underperform significantly, and because of that you might be better off running the 6P41 LMG if you're comfortable enough with the recoil, reload time and all the other horrible attributes that the LMGs have in Rainbow Six Siege. And that's it, thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video and I will see you in the next episode. For existing guns, the average Come on, Rogue, concentrate, you got this.